Yeah. Hi, Tom. Dogman is such a unique concept, blending humor, action, and art. How did you approach creating a musical identity for a character that is both part dog and part human?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with the director, Peter Hastings, who's also a very good musician, and we spent a lot of time talking about what the sound would be of the movie. And where what makes this a little bit unique is that there's quite lots of the characters have their own themes, which is not unusual, but the sound of the palette that's around those characters is quite different, certainly in the first half of the movie. And so Dogman, he has got what I'm calling mouth trumpet, which was an idea that was originally on kazoos, but then they were a bit brittle and in your face, and sort of we felt that it had been done before, so it was really just singing with your mouth closed for Dogman, and then along with panting sounds, just me breathing heavily into the mic very rhythmically, and then electric guitars and big band sounds and that kind of thing. And as the film progresses, the orchestra sort of joins in more and more until you arrive in the last sort of 20 minutes of the movie where the orchestra has kind of taken the lead, and those themes are being played within the orchestra. And hopefully you've absorbed them from earlier on in the movie in their different guises.
The film has a mix of crime thriller elements and playful carols. How did you balance these contrasting tones in your score?
Well, it's I mean, in really through use of themes. So I have, for instance, there's a cue, uh well, the big jump cue, which is the second track on the record. You hear the Petey theme at the very start of that cue, and it's played in quite a sort of grand way. It's when he comes up out of the sewer in his car, and he lands, and you hear it played there. And then in the next cue, which is called Bomb Squad, 15 or 20 seconds into that cue, you hear the same thing, but it's played on upright bass with alto flutes and pianos, and it's very much in a kind of 70s Mancini, Led Schifrin type vibe. And by having those themes be kind of a constant, even as the music gets quite epic later, and you hear, I mean, the Little Petey theme is a good example of that. The best example of that is in a cue called Abandoned, where you hear it in its long form and it's just solo piano and quartet. But you then hear it in the final showdown and another final showdown in, with choir singing it and everything like that. And so I find that if you set the themes up early on, and certain colors for those sounds, as long as you then keep using those later so that they sound familiar, you can progress the score and bring in different instrumentation and sort of hop around a bit without it feeling too kind of mad.
You have used inventive instrumentation like hand claps, funky brass, and vocalized sound effects in Dogman. Can you talk about your decision to incorporate these elements?
Yeah, I think that I mean, starting off on the score, it was just a blank canvas. There was no temp music and so it was just a time for experimentation. So I just tried like lots of different ideas, and those ones like the hand claps and things, they just stuck around as being. I just like the feel of it, and also they work from the beginning of the movie. The first 10 minutes is sort of attempting to ape the kind of 70s, and some of those sounds are just from that era, and so they just worked and stayed within. But I was kind of going for I find animation works best when you try and play everything very seriously. So even though the car chase in the opening sequence is a dog and a policeman who are talking to each other and avoiding kind of boxes full of the letter B, and it's all ridiculous. I played it as if it's Steve McQueen in Bullet. It's played in there's no difference musically in terms of the kind of, you could take that music and put it on another film from that era and it would work, I hope, in the same, and so um those elements, as you say, some of those sounds like the dog sounds and the the finger snaps and the claps and things like that, they're just authentic to some of the styles that I was trying to ape really. And so I kind of incorporated them like that and just built a kind of huge palette and stuff to work from.
Did you take inspiration from classic crime thriller score for Dogman? If so, which composers or film influenced your approach?
Well, my favorite film composer of all time is Ennio Morricone.
Mhm.
And I wasn't directly influenced by him as such, but I mean, although there is a sort of Mexican standoff in when just before Dogman, when Dogman turns up to take on Flippy at the end by the volcano, and they have a the screen shutters down, just like in those old films, and that does sound a bit sort of Wild West. But Ennio Morricone was a composer who could jump around between. You could have a Cinema Paradiso, and then you could have a Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and they sound very very different. But there's something about it that kind of binds it together. And Henry Mancini is a big influence to Peter Gunn and the Pink Panther and those sorts of things, and Lalo Schifrin, from the Mission Impossible and stuff like that. And so I didn't listen to those scores specifically or those composers specifically, but I'm well aware of their work in my journey as a composer. And so I think I was trying to kind of stay in that, or not stay, I was trying to sort of emulate that in some sort of way, certainly stylistically.
The dynamic between Dogman and Petey the Cat is central to the film. How did you use music to represent their rivalry and eventual alliance?
Um, well, I mean, for instance, in the queue, there's a queue arresting Petey in the early half of the movie, and it's a sort of 2.5, 3 minute montage, and it's hopping really between their different points of view and Petey heading back to jail. And I keep repeating the dog man motive every time he succeeds. So every time the handcuffs are about to go on Petey or Dogman has finally captured him, you get a little bit of his motive. And then when Petey gets back in the jail, it goes back to that kind of swing, sort of swung upright bass with more of the alto flute sound. So it stays in a kind of big band sat world throughout the whole thing, but the jail moments are very much small forces. And then when Dogman is on the scene, you get more of a kind of full on thing. And then every time Dogman makes the arrest, you get a quote of his tune. And I reharmonize that in different ways underneath, but it's always the same. The melody stays the same, and that happens throughout the movie when they're fighting and together. When as the movie progresses on, they obviously become co, they become friends and sort of end up fighting together. And so in that instance, then the sound becomes a bit more cohesive. But certainly early on, I tried to distinguish by having a big sound and a small sound and different melodies.
What was the most challenging scene to score in Dogman and why?
I think um, probably the opening, the very opening, because I wasn't quite sure. I knew what I wanted it to be, but um, I wasn't sure how far to lean into it being absolutely dead serious. So I kept adding in colors in that were a little bit lighter, I suppose. And Peter very rightly pushed back on that, and then in the end, it sounds like it does, where it's much more serious. And then the other one that was challenging, I mean, they're all challenging, but is the dog versus building cue. And there's a ripping sax solo throughout that, and it took a bit of thought to kind of work out what it should be and where it should rip. And it's not an easy thing to program that, when you're doing a demo, and that was pretty challenging too. But overall, the process was a pretty joyful one, really, and it was lovely working with somebody who really knows music, which Pete, the director, does.
Did director Peter Hastings or the animation team have specific musical references or ideas for the score, or were you given creative freedom?
Well, I was given creative freedom, but they were a lot of what I did musically was definitely down to Peter and I talking and sharing ideas back and forth of various things. And I would do something, and he might then comment on it and either say, well, that's going in the right direction or it isn't. But in terms of the animation team, there were a couple of cues in the movie. One of them, there's a TikTok dance when the lady at the super awesome science center's daughter has made a homemade. I had to write that before which so they could animate to it. And ditto the piano cue, Best Friends, which they where Little Petey and Dogman play together. That had to be done so they could animate to it. So I did that ahead of time, and actually that was quite challenging because I think the version that's in the film that might be my fifth go at that. There was a few rounds of that because that's a point where you've got no footage and you're writing music in a kind of slightly in a vacuum with no apart from phone calls of saying it should be X, Y, and Z, and we want it to be this long. You don't have much else to go on, and I'm best when I've got something in front of me that I have to tell a story with. So that was challenging.
Perfect. The film is packed with action sequences and comedy moments. How did you navigate and the rhythm and passing of this scare with your music?
Um, I think I mean, the comedy is very challenging, and I try to not write music that just sounds outright funny. I try to write music that sounds like music,
Mm.
and I will address the comedy by either playing the music dead straight or over the top. So if it's emotional and it's ridiculous, what's being said, I will over emote that to make it even more ridiculous. And if it's an action thing, I might make the action over the top too to highlight that, they're only kind of playing, I don't know, they're fighting on a football table, and you do something that's totally operatic and you make it sound over the top. And that can be funny. And the other thing is having breaks in the music. So putting in when a piece of music is playing along and you put stop gaps in it or stops every now and then, that's a way of highlighting without actually having to do something on a musical perspective to kind of draw everyone's attention. Just the fact that of there being no music means that it can be very effective. So I do that in the comedy. And then in terms of the action, always it's about hitting cuts and actions and timings and things. So it's about getting the right tempo and making sure that you move around the dialogue and the action. And that's the same within any genre, really.
Can you tell us about your recording process? Were there any unusual instruments or techniques used for this film?
Yeah, I did. I recorded electric guitars, and mandolin, and the dog panting sounds, and the mouth trumpet, and various other soloistic things here in my studio. And then I was in Air Studios in London.
Mhm.
I did 2 days with orchestra, and I tend not to lots of well, most film scores are recorded in a way where they can be separated. So people record strings, woodwinds, and brass separately. But I don't do that, and I had the whole orchestra in the room playing together for 2 days in air. So that was 76 players. And then I had a day of smaller orchestra, so solo woodwinds and like one horn and then a much reduced string section. And then I had a day of big band, so saxes, trumpets, and trombones. And then I had a day of band in the morning and choir in the afternoon and evening. And then a very long day of percussion. And so all those flavors that are in the movie, there's actually nothing in there that wasn't recorded. Sometimes on films you say, oh, well, the percussion is samples or everything you hear is played.
Were there any fun or unexpected musical experiments that made it into the final score?
Yeah, with the dog panting was a fun one, and the mouth trumpet, they both made it in. There's a sound for the mare, which is just a sound, which is a just a mandolin striked very hard behind the neck. And that was quite. I was trying to think of something for her, and it had to be just one, like the brie was just a one note thing, and you're like, oh, what's it? What's it going to be that doesn't sound? And that sounds unique. But I did try quite a few other things that didn't make it into the film. I tried recording a load of squeaky dog toys and then mapping them to a keyboard and playing that, and that was a terrible idea. And I tried some whistles and things, and they didn't work either. And I tried the kazoos, and that didn't work. So there's a lot of experimentation and messing around, but those are the sounds that certainly the panting and the mouth trumpet are unusual sounds. And there's a lot of guitar in this movie, a lot of electric guitar that's playing under the action things, and you don't always hear that on those scores as they get bigger and bigger, but that's a real through line where they start in the 70s funky world with wah wah, but they carry on throughout, and there's a lot of guitars in general just playing through stuff.
Since Dogman is a blend of ironic action and slapstick humor, how did you approach composing music that enhances both aspects?
Well, it's all picture led, really. So
Mhm.
if there's a moment where, I mean, there are a couple of moments in this where, for instance, when the first time you see Dogman and he you see him playing the piano in the old folks home, and then you see him in the stadium throwing the baseball, and then you see him they're tiny little musical moments. I mean, I'm talking maybe 2 or 3 seconds per section, and that's probably as close to slapstick, if you like, that the film this movie gets in terms of I had to record those bits and then put them together. But there wasn't a lot of slapstick around that intentionally, apart from those sort of moments. I tried to keep it playing straight, really. And then, yeah, the action certainly starts off in much more of a big band, um, uplifting, up tempo style. And as the film progresses, it moves much more dark orchestral, with those elements still kind of playing underneath.
And my last question, if you could have one of your composition from Dogman performed live with an orchestra, which piece would you choose and why?
I would probably choose Arresting Petey
Mhm.
because everybody's having a turn and it's completely bonkers. And it would be quite interesting to try and conduct that in one go, because there's some mad tempo changes. So it would need a bit of rehearsal, but I think it would be a lot of fun.
Thank you, Tom. Have a great day. See
You too.
you.
Thanks for your time, Boris.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Boris.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.